Hello everybody, I'm Oliver. This is Chaotic File, and I have a little confession to make. This is actually a best reads of 2024 video. So basically, I didn't get around to recording my favorite reads of 2024 earlier on this year because, as you may or may not know, I was moving continents at the time, and so I could have let this go. However, one, I can never let book things related go, and two, I am actually so excited to share this list with you. I had an amazing reading year last year, and I'm having a pretty good one this year as well. So I just wanted any excuse to tell you about these books. But before we get into the list proper, I just wanted to share a few general thoughts or highlights about last year. Number one is that 2024 was definitely a year of authors for me, by which I mean I love a lot of authors, and I do think of myself as someone who has favorite authors. However, I'm rarely a completionist when it comes to them, partly because, and this is bad, but I do think of myself as someone who's like, okay, I want to have a huge breadth of authors read. If I've already checked out an author, sometimes it's hard to prioritize reading more of their work, which when I do get to more of their work, I always think is a mistake because I enjoy it so much. I'm like, why haven't I been doing this the whole time? The other reason is just I also want to save a little bit of their work. However, last year I just sort of encountered a lot of new authors and I kept returning to them. Number two is 2024 was the year that my love for audiobooks solidified. I really want to make a video about this. I don't think it will happen this year, but definitely next year. I really, really want to talk a little bit about my audiobook journey and get into sort of the history of the audiobook and just sort of the aesthetics of reading when it comes to the audiobook. I think there's a lot of things to say beyond does listening to counts as reading, which who cares? It's definitely a different activity that I do differently, and I want to talk more about that. So more on that later. But yes, now I always have an audiobook on the go. And then number three is finally 2024 was the year where I finally always had a short story collection on the go, which felt really good. I love short stories and I love short story collections, and I like it as a form. I like studying it. Nowadays, we are going through a really interesting time because a lot of people don't like reading short story collections, and yet a lot of people do release them. It's sort of seen as a good way to debut or to release a book to tie you over, to get your name out there. And yet, a lot of readers actually like short stories because it's something you can read in bite sized chunks. But then, what happens when short stories are a bit longer? I don't know. Maybe there's a video there that I would also like to make at some point next year. So yeah, I've been really loving finally getting to all the short story collections and anthologies that I kept purchasing, and I'm enjoying them as much as I hoped to when I first got them. So that's all really good. Positive. So without further ado, because clearly I'm losing the plot here, these are my favorite books that I read in 2024. When I first heard about Dickens and Prince by Nick Hornby, I honestly didn't know what to expect, but I picked it up because I love Nick Hornby's nonfiction. I've read a bunch of it, including his collected The Complete Polysyllabic Spree, which is a column he did slash might still sometimes do for The Believer. And so I was just really curious, what parallels could he possibly draw between Charles Dickens and Prince? And I gotta say, he knocked it out of the park for me. The connections he draws, especially his thesis that there is a particular kind of always producing genius that both Dickens and Prince shared, and how that made them maybe not have purely bangers, but then how that always experimenting, always creating ethos resulted in some true masterpieces, and how he links all that up. I thought it was brilliant. It's short, it's really fun, it's funny because Nick Hornby's a funny guy. I really recommend it if you are looking to start your journey into cultural and literary criticism, this is actually a really good place to start because, again, it's accessible for everyone, but actually the insights are really, really interesting and they are so eloquently put. 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed this. Number 21 is Against Borders, The Case for Abolition by Gracie May Bradley and Luke de Noronha. And when I first read this smart yet really approachable and quite compact book about border abolition, I thought it was going to be one of my favorite reads of the year, way, way up high. It certainly brought a lot of ideas in my brain that I agreed with, but didn't necessarily have the theoretical arguments for. So I really do appreciate that. However, it does have these sections that I think have stayed with me far more than the other sections in terms of how specifically I remember them. And these were sections I did not particularly care for. There's two of them. And the first one is sort of a fictional recreation of a dystopia, and then at the end, a fictional creation of a utopia, and how like things could work in a way. But it just, I do like experimental nonfiction, but I don't know how I feel about it in political nonfiction in this way. Maybe I'm just too square for these things, but I'm like, why? I mean, I don't know. I guess it was comforting to read the utopia, and without the dystopia, the utopia wouldn't have felt justified. But then I'm like, I wish, I don't know. I felt weird reading it. I don't want to use the word cringe, but other than that, I think the book is great, and I definitely will be revisiting it, but I will probably skip those sections. And so, almost a year on, this is what I remember the most and most concretely, and that's why I think this book is more towards the bottom of the list. Obviously, I loved all these books, so it's okay, but just so you know. Regardless, I still think you should check it out because it is really interesting and really well argued. In 2024, I went through a sort of essay, book like essay phase, or like I just really wanted to read sort of literary criticism, but for the general public. And so you'll see a couple of those on this list. I guess number 22, Dickens and Prince, was also that. But number 20 is another one of those reads. It's Pretentiousness by Dan Fox, which I absolutely adored. Here, Fox approaches the idea of pretentiousness or snobbishness and why it's an important element in art and in the development of new art and new culture. But it doesn't do it in a, oh, we are all entitled to high mindedness, but actually approaching pretentiousness as something that every group of people can have about their own art and their own media. So, like when you're a teenager, you have some ideas about prestige and what it is cool, and you often rebel against the established aesthetic norms. And the way I am describing it sounds quite pretentious and very dry, but I promise it's not. It's really, really engaging. It's quite a thick book for a book length essay, I would say, but it flies. I read it in, I don't know if one sitting, but I really devoured it and I'm missing it already. I want to revisit it. So, so good. 100% recommend. Number 19 is Moms by Yeong-Shin Ma, and this is a Korean graphic novel about the lives of a group of female friends, one of which is the artist's mom, and they are all in their 50s. I was so impressed by, well, the art style is really compelling and the storytelling too, but it's fictionalized, but it is mentioned that it's clearly inspired by them. And I think at one point the artist does engage with the mom, and it was just so interesting to see a male artist in I think his 30s be so interested in the romantic and sexual lives of these women in their 50s and portray them with such humor and kindness, but also, again, yeah, without idealizing them or making them tamer. It's quite a, as I said, savage book, and I really appreciate it. It I really appreciated it. And yeah, it's really something different. I really recommend it. There is another book by the author called Artists that I really, really want to read, but it's really expensive, so I'm saving up to buy it. Yeah, it's just really good. Highly recommend. Another one that I would revisit. I need to stop saying that because I would revisit all of these books at some point. And if I was rooting for these women through their rights and wrongs, I was also really taken by the rights and wrongs of the characters in Eliza Clark's She's Always Hungry, which is her debut short story collection, as in she's published two previous novels, Boy Parts and Penance. I've only listened to actually uh, Boy Parts, and I really want to get to Penance. I'll do it at some point. But yeah, She's Always Hungry was an amazing collection. I liked every single story. I thought they were all gems. I know a lot of people haven't appreciated. I think the problem is this is a really tough sell in terms of tone. Yes, all the stories are weird, but there are some stories that are really goofy and yeah, kind of funny and sci-fi, and there are some other stories that are quite quietly horrifying, as in they're horror stories kind of, but they don't necessarily offer closure or resolution. So I've heard a lot of people be like, well, I like the stories that had a bit more plot, but then the other ones are a bit meh. And then conversely, there are other people who have really enjoyed the more quote unquote literary stories, but then the ones that are more silly, they've thought, oh, they are just too genre for me. And I think they're all great at what they're doing, and they show Eliza Clark's range and also signature spirit of awkwardness. And yeah, I just really, really love them, and a lot of them have stuck with me and I remember them quite vividly, which is always a great sign. So I really recommend She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark if you're in the mood for some truly weird contemporary fiction. Number 17 is Bolt from the Blue by Jeremy Cooper, which might be a bit controversial because his most well known work is Brian, which I did read last year as well, and I loved. So I guess what I'm saying is number 17 is both of these books. Because in case 22 books wasn't enough, Bolt from the Blue is an epistolary novel that takes us through decades, if I remember correctly, in this relationship between a mother and a daughter. It starts when she goes from a smaller city or maybe a small town even to London. She moves to study art and they just keep sending each other postcards. I don't remember if it shows both sides or just the daughter because I think they do reference letters that don't appear on the page, but I do think I recall seeing some of the mom's letters, so who knows? It's just beautiful, and I was so moved by it, and also so impressed by how well Jeremy Cooper seemed to just portray these women and quite sensitively. And yeah, it's a nice evocation of the feminine world in ways that I'm just surprised a 70 something year old man was interested in. And then Brian is it's such a lovely story. So there's this 40-year-old man, or 40-ish, who has quite a regular life, quite methodical, and he's very lonely. Well, he's more of a loner. And it's the situation where, is he lonely? Does he enjoy it? He's not even quite sure himself. But then he starts frequenting the BFI in London, which is it's a whole institute, but he started frequenting the cinema that they own, and he becomes a film buff and meets other film buffs, and this just follows him through his life. It's so interesting. It's also a big work of film criticism because it goes through what Brian thought of these films. And I thought the most interesting bit for me was the subtle ways in which Brian's own personality and reflections of his life were incorporated, especially when it came to gender, romance, and sexuality. It was just really fascinating, and I wasn't expecting it to go there. Like all of Jeremy Cooper's work, these books are very quiet but unpretentious, but also these people are clearly preoccupied with art and sort of art in this very tangible way as it brings us comfort and companionship and connection. I just, yeah, if you're in the mood for something like that, I really recommend any of his books because they're amazing. In another cheaty way, 16 and 15 are together because I couldn't decide which Nathan Hill book I liked more. I read both The Nix and Wellness last year and I love them both. So, Nathan Hill is often described as a poor man's Jonathan Franzen, and as a big fan of Jonathan Franzen myself, I think the comparison is both apt and kind of unfair. So, sure, Nathan Hill also writes these big, epic family sagas that take two people and their surroundings and takes them through decades to sort of talk about political and social issues. But I think Nathan Hill is a really skilled writer and a really skilled plotter of novels. So I honestly don't know where he falls short of Franzen. Franzen has some bangers, but also a few duds, to be honest. So not to put him down, I do love him. But yeah, in any case, I do think the comparison is apt in terms of if you like Jonathan Franzen, you'll probably like Nathan Hill. And so the Nix is about this writer who was a young, promising author and was paid a huge advance for his next book, and then he never came up with it. And now his mom, who has been estranged from him for, I think, decades, has just committed what is classified as a terrorist attack where she threw stones at a politician, and suddenly he has a topic he could write about, and it all unfolds from there. And then wellness is about two people, a young man and a young woman who meet in college, and now they've been married for 15 years. Life is not the same. They are both artsy people, and they are in this milieu of, you know, gentrifying cool people, but yeah, sort of it exposes health trends and contemporary society without being curmudgeonly. It's like, let's look at these things that can be ridiculous, but also, is it really the things themselves that are ridiculous, or are the people the ridiculous ones? And yeah, it's just really interesting analysis, but also it is so fun. Both of them are so fun. They are chunksters, and I absolutely devoured them because they were so, so good. And so, if you're in search of your next beach read, might I suggest a Nathan Hill book? And speaking of books that you could take on a holiday, All Fours by Miranda July is sizzling. Did I say it right? Sizzling. Oh my god, I should have picked another word. Burning, hot, scorching. The perfect literary beach read. It's about this middle aged queer artist woman who embarks on this insane project to renew a motel room. At the same time, she has an emotional affair with a much younger dancer guy who is also married, which is why they never take the affair that far, but they still have quite an intense affair emotionally. And you'd think that would be enough for a whole book, but that's actually barely half of the novel because this affair awakens in her this need to explore herself and to sort of, yeah, just discover what life means now after this awakening event. And so this search leads her to crazy and often very sexual places. I will say I listened to this on audiobook, and in this case, I do think it added so much. It is read by Miranda July, who is a director and performer herself, and she just performs this book with her whole chest. I can still hear her cadences, the way she doesn't really do the voices, but kind of does in a way that's really non intrusive, and it's so nice to listen to. She has a great voice, but also, again, she really brought the book to life. And when I say I can still hear it, I mean it in my head, but also I can still hear it because this is actually what I'm listening to right now as my audiobook. It is just as fun as I remembered and just as illuminating. I really would like to read a physical copy as well, just to know how much of it is the narration, although I guess if I read it now, I would still hear her in my head, but also because I just want to be able to highlight and see the sort of inner monologues that she has. Her brain as a character is so convoluted. It's quite a high maintenance character, and she's very weird, as all of Miranda July's characters tend to be. And so I would just really like to see that on the page. But yeah, I just really recommend it. Be warned, it does have a lot of sex and a lot of weirdness generally. If you don't like that, maybe this is not the book for you. But yeah, it's a bit ridiculous. I think if you're easily embarrassed by other people, maybe this is not for you. But oh, it's so good. I really loved it. And as I said, the proof is I am rereading it or re-listening to it. Next up, another short story collection, How to Pronounce Knife by Souvankham Thammavongsa. Whenever I discuss this short story collection with other people, they always joke, "Oh, knife," and I say, "Yes, exactly." Because you see, the first short story is about this little girl who is the daughter of Laotian parents, and they're living in Canada, and it's about her asking her dad how to pronounce knife, and he says knife, and then she goes to class and reads the little paragraph and says knife, and the teacher corrects her, and she has a meltdown because in her mind the idea that her dad was wrong and he didn't know everything, and especially in this context, it's just such a huge realization, and it's embedded with so many, again, politics about language and immigration, and it's so heart-wrenching that I still think about it. It still gives me chills. And I read this collection in January. And all of the stories are this intense. I rest my case. I've never read anything like Deena Mohamed's Your Wish is My Command, which is number 12 on this list, and I love every single page. It's set in El Cairo, and it's a graphic novel with three interrelated narratives in this world where genie wishes have been bottled and are being sold as any other commodity, and therefore there are different qualities and standards and regulations, and it's my favorite type of sci-fi slash fantasy. It explores political, social issues in a world that's pretty much like ours or constructed as if it was ours, but then the world is also different, if that makes sense. So in this case, people live their lives just the same, but there's also genie wishes, and it's just brilliant. The story is really well constructed. I love how everything is interwoven and circles back in interesting ways. It does have this sort of frame narrative, fable like tone to it at times, but it still feels very modern, very cheeky. And yeah, the art style is really beautiful, especially the use of color is really breathtaking. Especially nowadays that, well, no, I was gonna say there's a lot of like black and white things happening, but that's not true. There's also lots of interesting things in graphic novels right now happening with color. But yeah, this is one example of that. So if you have any interest in literary graphic novels at all, I really recommend this. It's really interesting. You won't regret it. Number 11, Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine should be required reading for everyone, everywhere. period. Yes, it's a chunkster for sure, but I cannot stress enough how fundamental her theory, very well argued, of how countries, and especially the US, created these uh, climates or these opportunities to impose neoliberal economic policies in other countries through what she terms disaster capitalism, and using shock doctrines that they took from torture manuals that the CIA and other um, agencies and organizations were developing. Is just so relevant and so enraging, but it's also so illuminating. So I just really think you should all check it out. It's definitely like a really hard read. Again, it does delve into torture and obviously a lot of enraging behavior and inequality and just evilness as close as you can get to pure evil. But yeah, again, it's also really interesting and necessary to know about. I noticed the light is getting really spooky. I might turn on the light. We'll see. Klein is also a very confident writer, and so the way she interweaves the shock doctrine aspects with history and political analysis is just quite masterful. Chile, my home country, features quite centrally in this narrative because we were one of the countries most affected by these tactics. The US uh, pretty much engineered our coup that led to a decade long, well, more than a decade long dictatorship, the Pinochet dictatorship. Um, and it was only 20 years after the dictatorship had ended, really, that people started discussing the US interventionist side, and it's still something that's not being fully reckoned with. And yeah, it's just, again, so enraging, but on a personal level, it was really interesting and just fascinating to read my own history or my own country's history from the perspective of an outsider looking in. And beyond that, I just think it's really important to understand recent history, the current state of affairs, and unfortunately, it remains painfully relevant for the current political climate. So please go pick this up. I would recommend either obviously a hard copy, which I do own, but also the audiobook is really good. Naomi Klein reads it herself, and she is a very good speaker as well. So I would recommend. Is this really better? I don't know, but we're going with it. We are now entering the top 10. Now, this is pretty arbitrary since on a different day I might have ranked these books differently. However, I will say that doing this list almost a year after has helped me gain some hindsight. And so a big component of how I re-ranked the books once I started revising the list has been staying power. And oh my god, has Get the Picture by Bianca Bosker had staying power. So Bianca Bosker is definitely one of my favorite nonfiction authors now. Um, she wrote Cork, Dork, which is a book in which she drops everything to become a sommelier in record time as she tries to understand what the big fuss is about wine. And then in this book, she commits in equal amounts to understanding art because she says she's never understood visual arts very much. And so she starts working galleries and fairs. She gets to an artist studio. She even becomes a museum guard. And spoiler alert, she gets it. She understands what the big fuzz is about visual arts. And as an art lover myself, it was just so inspiring to see her approach these topics with such open heartedness and just genuine curiosity. It also reveals a lot of terrible things about the art world, but I love that those bits are quite open, but she never becomes cynical, and her takeaway is, oh, everyone can enjoy art, and this is why, and this is how, and it's just so good. uh Also, I will say on a personal note, this was the first book I read after my top surgery last year, and it was such an engaging read. And it will also always take me back to those few days, which I thought would be quite daunting and were actually some of the best of my life. So, yeah, I just have a lot of love for this book, and I really highly recommend it. Number 9 is a little gem by one of my all-time favorite critics. Females by Andrea Long-Chu is a riff on controversial female artist Valerie Solana's work generally, and more specifically her play Up Your Ass, wherein Long-Chu dives into gender and feminism, all through a trans lens, again in general, but also through her specific studying of Solana's in college, and also her transition or like pre-transition years. It's all really interesting and woven together in a very, very thoughtful, skilled way. You definitely are in safe hands. There's nothing I can add really. It's brilliant, and actually her newest collection of essays, well, I don't know if it must include a couple of new essays, but most of the pieces in the book that has come out in August, it's called Authority. I've said this terribly out of order. But yeah, she released this book, and I am really looking forward to it. It's one of my most anticipated books of the year. I hope to get my hands on a copy in December because I'll be in London then. Yeah, I'm just so excited. Just in case you're a bit wary of committing to either book before reading her work, may I suggest Hanya's Sad Boys. It's her brilliant dissection of Hanya Yanagihara's work, and I'll link it down below so you can check it out. I promise you, you will not regret it. It's so good. Number 8 is Escape from St. Hell by Louis Hancox, and this is the sequel to his previous graphic memoir, Welcome to St. Hell, which also made my favorites list of whatever year I first read it in, probably 2022, 2023. And while the first one detailed him coming to terms with his gender and coming out as trans, this one dives into what happens after you begin transition and the struggle of those first few years that I can attest to being really tough. I'll be honest and say that obviously this is a very easy sell for me. I love graphic memoirs generally, and this specifically was just such a great companion at a time where I needed the most. It did feel that it arrived just as I was reaching that point in transition where things are starting to kick in, but there's still such a long way to go, and it's all quite gray. When people talk about media getting you through things, they are talking about me reading this book. It was so comforting, I can't even put it into words really. Aside from my personal identification, however, I do think Hancox is so talented. I really appreciate the art style, which is pretty cartoonish. He also borrows a lot of imagery and metaphors from video games. That's why the tagline of this graphic memoir is "My trans life levels up." The video games framing is used to portray these little interactions or challenges is quite sweet and also funny, but again relatable. So I really, really recommend it. Number 7 is yet another short story collection, My Documents by Alejandro Zambra, which is perhaps his best fiction work. Granted, I haven't read all of them yet, but I've read a substantial amount, and I can tell you which definitely aren't his best ones, and those are Chilean Poet and The Private Life of Streets. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Anyway. My Documents features all of Zambra's main themes: masculinity, father son and stepson relations, relationships with women, anxieties of a 30 something, 40 something year old, you know, poet type, artsy type male, and romance in these circumstances, post dictatorship and post return to democracy Chile, and the sort of sequels from the enduring sequels from having been through a dictatorship, and then sort of the navigation back to democracy in a neoliberal economy and the implications of all of that. It talks about class and money. All the stories just feel so crisp and quotidian in a way that is quite rare in Chilean contemporary literature. This is not to say that the stories are insubstantial. On the contrary, they feel really profound, funny, and insightful, and quite heartfelt, but always in interesting ways. They're very surprising at times. The writing is so good. Obviously, I can't vouch for the English translation, but it is done by Megan McDowell, who is an amazing translator. So I'm confident to assure you you'll be in safe hands. And so I hope you will pick this up and enjoy it loads. Last year, I read 3 out of the 4 books in the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. And oh my god, I get it now. The shortest pitch ever because everyone has talked about this already. The book follows the lives of 2 friends, Lenu and Lila, both of them brilliant. One, Lila, wild and brilliant, and the other very dutifully brilliant as they grow and they, try to survive as women in the, I want to say, 70s, with a very violent, poor neighborhood in Naples as their background. Of course, they have a really interesting, complicated relationship, which a lot of people say, oh, they aren't really friends, which I think is just to completely misunderstand the background in which they grew up and how these types of friendships work. They do have a lot of love for each other, quite intense love, but also there is competitiveness there. There is oppression there, mutual, and also not knowing what the other is going through. It's just, oh, so good. The last image of the first novel. Oh, yes, I wanted to say, sorry. On this list, I'm putting My Brilliant Friend because even though I think the entire quartet is great, I still think if My Brilliant Friend had been a standalone, I would have been fine with it. I don't think that is true for any of the other novels. I think all of them together are a great work, but I don't think any book is just singularly as good. And then the last image of that first novel, which I won't say what it is, obviously, it's just seared in my brain. I haven't watched the show yet, but I have such a visual representation of it in my mind. And I can't really think of any book that's done that to me in that same way. But generally, though, the quartet is great. You should read it. The way she constructs character, the way she uses time, and the musings on language are all really, really interesting. There's so much about dialect and language as it reveals class and also language as a strategy to connect, to attack, to defend yourself. It's narrated from Lenu's viewpoint in the future, or actually, like, it's a retrospective book. So she's become a writer, and there's loads of that. It's just so brilliant. No pun intended. If you are unconvinced about embarking on the whole quartet, just read the first book. I think you can just do that. And I mean, I think it would be difficult for you not to want to read the following ones, but read the first one because it's just that good. And it works really well on its own. I feel like I say this whenever I talk about David Foster Wallace, so I am going to shut up after this one. But I hate how much I love and identify with David Foster Wallace nonfiction, especially. He was a terrible man, very complicated, very tortured. He did a lot of abusive things, and honestly, if he was alive today, I might hesitate about whether to talk about him on camera. But alas, he's not. So, String Theory is a collection of all his writings on tennis. I think it's 5 essays. They are all brilliant to the point where I have never cared about tennis, and now I feel like one of my top bucket list items is I need to go to a great tennis match live because David Foster Wallace had made it seem so interesting. He played tennis competitively throughout his teens and I think early 20s, and he remained an avid fan until his death. He went to matches and he was tasked to write a few of these essays. And these essays do appear on other collections. Maybe that's a minus for you because then if you do like them and you go back to buy the collections, you'll see them repeated. However, my counter argument to this is a great way to start with David Foster Wallace because I think these essays are him at his best. Like, clearly, they are so well edited, which was a problem for Foster Wallace at times, accepting edits. But these are quite crisp and to the point. My favorite of them is How Tracy Austin Broke My Heart, which is a look into sports memoirs generally and why they often suck, but then how the blandness of character that these sports memoirs reflect might be the key to the athlete's success. If you're wondering how does that make sense, read the essays. They're really good. Number 4 comes with a fun story time. I was actually working at this publisher's in the lead up to the release of Philippe Sand's 38 Londres Street. And when I saw a proof on the editor's desk, I immediately emailed her being like, please, please, please. And I did play the Chilean card because you see in this book, Philip Sands interweaves 3 stories. Number 1 is the story of Walter Rofe, who was a Nazi torturer who escaped to first Argentina and then moved to Chile, and he lived in the south of Chile for the rest of his life, and he actually helped with torturing during the dictatorship. Number 2 is Pinochet's extradition trial. Well, I don't know if officially was a trial, but basically, Pinochet had fled to London where his friend Margaret Thatcher had helped him stay. There was a whole process, legal process, through which he had to be extradited. And actually, Philip Sands was involved in that personally because he was asked to operate on behalf of Pinochet, so he couldn't be extradited, but he refused to do it for reasons that he discusses in the book. And yeah, it's really eye opening. And then the third strand is him traveling to Chile and some other places, sort of interweaving the previous narratives and in the process of writing this book and retelling his own experiences, and it's all quite intense. It seems crazy that this should be such recent history in a way. I was a child when some of the facts of this book were happening, and so I kind of remember seeing some of these things in the news, but obviously I didn't really understand them. Also, it seems a bit crass to say that this reads like a thriller, but it really does. It is so engaging. I just really recommend it. Again, it's a great book. Philip Sands is a great international lawyer who's done a lot of good in his life, but he's also a really good writer. Read this. Highly recommend. It came out in hardcover this year, so paperback should be ready maybe next year. Look out for that. I enjoyed Out of Sheer Rage so much. I kept quoting it to friends and colleagues. And when I say quoting it, I mean I would bust out my copy and read excerpts. And I know what you're thinking. He sounds like such a good time at parties, and you'd be correct. I just couldn't help myself. Dyer's account of his struggles to settle on where to live and whether to write a new novel or a critical biography of D.H. Lawrence he was always meaning to write, then settling on the D.H. Lawrence book, only to procrastinate it to painful, absurd extents, is one of the funniest, most insightful texts I have ever read, and I recommend it to every bookish person. He has this grumpy persona that is just self deprecating enough to work. And although I can see how some people might find him too neurotic, I also think it's just so funny. And my battery's dying, so I need to do something about that. The brilliant turn is not only that this is one of the most compelling, honest books on writing, at least from a semi contemporary perspective, because this was published in 1997. And I will say that the economics of living as an author are very different. But that's not the book's fault. But it's also actually a really interesting book on D.H. Lawrence at times. And trust me, there are few authors I want to read less than D.H. Lawrence. We don't have time to get into that now. I have a gym class I need to get to. But actually, instead of wanting to skip the D.H. Lawrence sections, I was really, really moved by them and really enjoyed them. It's because Geoff Dyer gets at what compels us as readers and why we build bonds with our favorite authors. It's just such a great book. It's one of those classics books about books, and I think it might be, well, do I prefer it over A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders? I am not sure. They are just two very different books in terms of what they're doing. But I just think this is brilliant. And I do want to read more Geoff Dyer. So maybe that's on the bucket list for next year. You Have the Right to Remain Fat, a manifesto by Virgie Tobar, was healing. Period. It's a book-length essay about fatness, fat phobia, and particularly about this, is it a notion or is it a habit? But basically about how fat people are always encouraged to see futurity through a thin lens and always encouraged to strive for thinness and imagine that there will be a point in your life in the future where you will be thin and life will be better because life as a fat person sucks. Obviously the book resists against that, and therefore it has this very powerful line where it says, in the future I am fat, or in my future I see myself as fat. And obviously it's in the title as well. You have the right to remain fat. I've talked about this in a previous video, but basically, since the beginning of my transition, fat liberation texts have been essential to reconciling my relationship to my own body. And I would say that this, out of all of the ones that I've read already, is probably my favorite. But yeah, I highly, highly recommend it, regardless of body size. It's published by Melville House, and it's very short, concise, but packs a punch. So do check it out. And finally, the Big Kahuna, the first book that I keep revisiting stories from it. I still haven't recovered. Also read it quite early on. I can't shut up about it. Ask anyone in my life. It's The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. It's a short story collection and it's devastating. Each of these stories are heartbreaking, except perhaps the last one, which is quite sweet. It's bittersweet, but it's very uplifting, and it's such an interesting choice in such a devastating collection to start with one of the most affecting short stories I've ever read and finish it up with actually a really sweet story that still made me cry while I was on the bus because it hit so close to home. I will actually link it down below. It's called The Third and Final Continent, and you'll see. I love how she writes. I think her style is just so precise. The way she dives into interiority is almost a little bit cold, but personally that makes it even more affecting. She doesn't do really close third in a very traditional way. It's always a little bit outsider narration looking in, even when the omniscient narrator is diving into a person's feelings. And so it's just a very interesting voice. And again, these stories are just all so good. She writes mostly about a very specific type of diaspora. It's the Indian diaspora, often in America, but often through academic means, which is also obviously something that I'm very personally interested in. She writes a lot about relationships and family and culture. Some of the stories are set in India too and have more of a magical realist bent. Which I thought I wouldn't enjoy as much, but actually I did. Honestly, I could waffle on about these stories for hours on end, but as I mentioned, I do have a gym class to catch, so I'm gonna shut up now. Honestly, all of these books are great, but if you do want to read short stories that are as good as reading a novel, quote unquote, if you sort of struggle with short stories and want them to pack a punch of like a story, I honestly cannot recommend Jhumpa Lahiri enough. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I do realize 22, actually 23. books is quite a lot for a best of the year list, but I just couldn't narrow it down more than this. I wanted to tell you about all of these books, so I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, if you plan to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them. What have you been reading? Do you think you've read your favorite book of the year so far? Or do you still hold out hope that there is another book that will top whatever you've hold as the first one right now? One last thing is I'll be doing reads for Palestine in September, which is basically a fundraiser. There's many ways to do the pledging of the donation. So I'll just link the official website down below so you can check it out. It's such a great initiative. So if you'd like to get involved, that will be linked down below as well. And yeah, see you next time. Which is, I think these, I think there's, sorry. I think, and yes, it's a chunkster. Oh my god, the dogs are still barking. There's nothing I can do about this though, because I do need to leave in exactly 5 minutes.